Are continuing learning about the fundamentals of faith, and we covered the first four in a number of ways. Moshe, if I could ask you just to go to Rav Listman and ask him for a few more staples.
If I don't pass out on the way, sure.
Are you sick? Well, we can ask someone else then.
He's already gone.
Oh, we have staples here? Perfect. You don't even have to go to the library, to the office. Thank you so much. In any case, the laws of... we were learning the fundamentals of faith. The first four, what are they? Who remembers? God exists. God is one. Number 3 is that he has no body, not incorporeal, correct? No body, right? And the fourth, sorry?
God is eternal.
Eternal, God is eternal, right? Did we mention that the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is the beginning of this week's Parsha, maybe we're going to talk about it a little more, it has in the word, what's the root of that Yud Kei Vav Kei name? It's hard to say root of a name, because names are just names. But yeah, right, we see the heyot, the verb to be, and this is what I think Rabbi David Aaron likes to say. That's God is beer. God is beer. How do you figure?
You know that the word bira has another
I remember
meaning.
from last year.
You were here?
No, I saw that on Zoom. I remember that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So do you remember what the idea is?
Yeah.
So you want to tell us?
So,
a dancer. What does a dancer do?
He dances. So
He
he's a
da-
dancer.
Right. He dances. He's a dancer.
You want another example?
Another example is someone who works is a worker. Worker works. Right.
And a beer is who bees.
Right. A beer is somebody who bees. Right. Who is? They said God is as well. It's being. He is a be. He's being. Actually, we're going to see. It's the beginning of the parsha. The first paragraph introduces this name of God, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, in many ways.
The word bira, bet yud resh hey, could also mean capital.
It could. But this is an English pun, not a Hebrew pun. But they're both bad. It's okay. The point is that that has the present, the past, and the future tense. If you just play with the letters there, and so that's God being eternal, could somehow be expressed in the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. But maybe we'll come back to that. Maybe Rav Listman spoke about it in his Parsha class, how significant it is, the introduction of this name at this point, at this juncture in the story of the Exodus. In any case, that was number 4. What's number 5?
Praise is only to God.
That's right. Praise is only to God. And we saw the different versions of that.
And he's almighty.
That he is almighty. And when we looked at the parallel to the list that we had in our Siddur, in the Yigdal, we noticed that perhaps the focus should be on the fact that, what does it say? That it's worthy to pray only to him and to no other entity. So pass these around, please. And actually, where the Rambam expands upon this idea, this fundamental of faith, really is in the laws of Avodah Zarah. And what we see here is that is really what he means. It's sort of like the flip side. Oh, what's the first of the 10 Commandments? Anybody know the first of the 10 Commandments?
I can say it in English.
Say it in English.
I'm your Lord thy God.
I'm the Lord thy God. Okay, and what's the second of the 10 Commandments? Do not have any other gods. Yeah, right, so it's like two sides of the coin, the positive mitzvah and the negative mitzvah. So here too, it seems like fundamental 5 of the Rambam, although he talks about prayer and it's only worthy to pray to him, it sounds like he's really, for the first time, after he split number 1 commandments from the 10 commandments, he split it into 4. God exists and he's one, Hashem Echad, and he's eternal, and he's incorporeal. All that is an expansion of Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Now he finally comes in. Number 5, he comes around to the flip side, which is don't have any other gods, don't worship any other gods. And that's what I want to show you. In the Rambam, in his Mishne Torah, an introduction to Hilchot Avodat Kochavim, he is a beautiful, you could call it historiography of the idol worship and the Jewish innovation, if you will. Moshe,
Yes.
you wanted to ask a question, or
So you mentioned the first two commandments where I'm Lord thy God. You should not have any other gods before me. I know it could be a midrash, I think, or it could come from Rambam that the Gematria of Torah is 611,
Mhm.
and the reason why
It's a Gemara, yeah.
Yeah, it's from the Gemara. Okay, there's
Mhm.
the Gematria of Torah is 611, and the reason for that is because those two commandments were given first,
That's right.
and then we were given the Torah.
That's right. That's right. The first two, there's a tradition that it says we're going to read it in a few weeks. I don't want to give any spoilers, but the Jewish people they do get out of Egypt, and afterwards they go to Sinai, and at Sinai the story goes that God starts to speak to them, and at some point the people say, wait, too much. It's too much. We can't handle it anymore, and so God says, okay, that's all right. I understand. They're making a good point that. And so I'm going to, create prophets. I'm going to give the prophecy to Moses, and he'll transfer it all over to you. And there's a debate when exactly that happened, that story of, God stopping and letting Moses, tell the rest of the people. The traditional interpretation, the Chazal say that it was after the first two. The first two they heard from God directly, and the rest they heard. The drasha is, Moshe, on the pasuk in the Gemara, Torah. The word Torah is 611, as you said. Tziva lana Moshe. Moses commanded us 611, as opposed to the first two, which we heard from God directly. Right? So that's a good point. Anyways, so the first two, so we're still really in the basis of the beliefs of Judaism. So let's take a look to see how the Rambam introduces here. Hilchot Avodat Kochavim. Avodat Kochavim means, what's the title mean?
Worship of the stars. Worship service.
Right. Kochav is a star. Kochavim is plural for stars. Avodah is worship. Worship the stars. So obviously you're not supposed to worship. How many mitzvot?
51.
Right, so as you know, the Rambam wrote a book of the 613. I showed you the book. We have it in translation in our library. And there's the positive commands, negative commands, sum total of 613. About one paragraph for each. Right, perfect, exactly. This is the book. But then when he makes his big book, the big book called the Mishne Torah, the entire code, the 14 books of the Rambam, he, at the beginning of every subsection, but there's 14 books, each book is divided into 5 to approximately subsections. At the beginning of each subsection, he says which mitzvot are going to be covered. And I described to you that he actually writes out this was programmatic. He had a plan. He wanted to make sure he covered all the mitzvot in the Torah. And so before each section, he lists all the mitzvot that are included, the mitzvot that are biblical commands, part of the 613, that are included. They're going to be covered by the laws which he's going to set out in this section. So here's a list, 51 mitzvot that have to do with the popular term we say avodah zara. Zar means foreign. Avodah zara is the feminine. And you could call it avodat kochavim. It means the same thing. Whether it's a star or a stone or an idol, it's all forbidden worship. So, but as a matter of fact, there is many times the censors. I'm not sure what the original is. I think it might be. Can you bring me that blue volume of the Rambam one more time? Because that's a better text. I'm wondering if that really is his title. Say there, it's in. Yeah, it's called Avodat Kochavim Vechukotehem, the worship of the stars and their laws, or their practices. But in the Talmud, for example, and throughout Jewish history, there were censors who came and they blacked out words in the Jewish writings. Are you aware of that? I've seen it with my own eyes. A friend of mine's father was a collector, and he had, so Christian censors, sometimes even they hired Jews to do it because they had to know how to read Hebrew and all this stuff. And you got to be quite a scholar to know what to erase. So it's amazing. You see that so many times. It becomes, because this was such a major thing, the Christians were so sensitive to anything against them, they would it became so sensitive for the Jews, so there was even something called self-censorship. So already we're not going to write it in any way that can be misinterpreted by the censors, and then they're going to start cutting up our books and ruining them, and then who knows, maybe they might ban it. And so instead of using the term nochri, which means a foreigner, which means a non-Jew, or a pagan, which a pagan, I guess, is clear the Christians didn't consider themselves pagans. Many times what you'll find is that instead of the word nochri in the Talmud, they put in an acronym. Where are the markers?
Marcus? Under the...
Oh, underneath. Oh, perfect. Wow, look at that. Purple. That's new. That's fun. So it became an acronym which is very well known. I'll just... Akum. Akum. Instead of the word nochri, they would erase nochri and put the word akum. Why? Avodat, it stands for ovdei, the worshippers, right? Kochavim, mazalot. Stars and constellations.
Interesting.
So the worshippers of constellations, of stars and constellations, and that is an easy way just to say, okay, we're not the Christians. The Christians don't worship the stars. It's those old pagan astrologists who worship, or maybe the original Greeks who worshiped the stars and believed in the astrology and so forth. So this is many times a censorship, which still exists in books today. You'll see people saying the word akum. Anyways, Avodat Kochavim that was a classic ancient idol worship or foreign worship, which the Rambam is going to talk about. It's just in terms of the title, that's something you should know. Okay? Now, the 51 mitzvot. 51? Can we be good at math? How many is that out of 613?
51 and 613.
Yeah, how many? Oh, how much percent is that?
It's about a 12.
About
less than a 12.
That's about right.
8%.
8%, thank you. 8% of the mitzvot speak about not to worship other gods. It's a pretty hefty amount. Right. There's over 100 that deal with the temple service. That's also pretty hefty. That's even bigger. But this is pretty hefty. So 51 mitzvot. You could have just said it in one. In the 10 Commandments, it's one commandment, right? It's actually two. There's one after the third is also about the foreign gods, I think. It depends how you count. It depends. There's different ways of counting the 10 Commandments. They're not actually 10 commandments. But Shalom Lanan. Boker Tov. Shalom. Boker Tov. It's okay. Welcome. Okay. Oh, Shalom Aleichem. Please.
Rabbi, what's your last
Plenty of
name?
room.
Ehrenstamm.
Aleichem. Come on.
So I would heavily discourage sitting here.
Oh, so come over here. Come on the other side then.
Okay.
This room over here. As a matter of fact, you might get more germs of you from across the table, but it's okay.
This way.
Yeah. The truth is, if you have a mask, Moshe, if you are sick, put on a mask. Yeah. Put on a mask. Yeah. Can't hurt. מצוין. יופי, שלום. אני זוכר אותך. I remember you. You came a year ago or something. Yeah, for a day or two. Yeah.
I've been there 2-3 times.
Perfect. Yes. Welcome
That
back.
was a magnificent memory.
Oh, wow.
Maybe for a face, I'll remember, but the name I didn't remember. Thanks, Moshe. In any case, so please here have one of these, and Renan have one of these as well. Pass this down. Thank you. We're just going to briefly look at the list, and then we're going to get to the meat, to the heart of the Rambam's explanation, is his history of. This is a strange class. It's the history. It's all about idol worship. Chumash mitorah chayim. That's right. The worship of stars. Today we're going to be star worshippers. Chas v'chalila. Yeah, that's it. Maybe that's it. Is that it?
Wow.
Okay.
$1 million.
And
Last night, stop perfection. Where's my
Yofi. So Hilchot Avodat, 51 mitzvot. Who wants to read them quickly?
Not to show interest in the worship of false gods, and to stray after the thoughts of one's heart or the sights one's eyes behold.
Stop there. Where in the Torah does it say that? Not to stray after the thoughts of one's heart and the sight one's eyes.
The first part of Shema. We say the first.
Close. But no cigar. I'll say it in Hebrew and then maybe that'll help you. V'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem. Do not stray after your heart
It's in the Shema.
and after your eyes. It's in the Shema.
It's not the first.
It's not in the first part. It's in the third part, right? Yeah, that's why I said you were close. But the third part of Shema.
To remember,
Right?
to see the tzitzit and don't then remember.
That's
not
right. The
to-
tzitzit, and you remember the mitzvot,
Yeah.
and don't stray after your heart. Did you know that has something to do with idol worship? It's a little bit straight. Don't stray after your heart. I'm thinking, in my mind, sorry, maybe it's just me, but I'm thinking, it's a delicious piece of chocolate cake, and going to go against my diet. That and it looks so good, and then, just have one more bite, right? That's like don't stray after your eyes and your heart and whatever your desires are. The truth is, the Rambam is very clear here that it involves foreign worship, but also the standard interpretation that it expands to any enticement to do evil, to do avero, to do sins and transgressions. So, but the original context, the Rambam here is lo taturu. Okay, please go ahead, Moshe.
Not to curse God, not to worship false gods with the type of service with which they are customarily served, not to bow down to false gods, not to make an idol for oneself, not to make an idol even for others, not to make images even for decoration, not to persuade others to worship false gods, to burn an apostate city, never to rebuild it, not to derive benefit from any of its property, not to persuade a single individual to worship false gods, not to love a mesite.
What's a message?
A mesite is someone who, like it said in the previous one, who convinces others to worship idols. Like, did you see that number 1 is
Not to show interest.
not to persuade. Number 9, not to persuade. So someone who persuades others is a mesite. So number 14 is not to love someone who, first of all, don't be that guy and don't love that guy. 14 connects to 9. You understand? Okay, go ahead.
Not to reduce one's hatred for him, not to save his life, not to advance any arguments on his behalf, not to withhold information that will lead to his conviction.
Well, so stop there. That you see, there's like 4 or 5 mitzvot about this guy who convinces others to persuades others to worship foreign gods. That's a bad. That's. Whew.
It's not a good profession.
Not a good profession to be. So you understand maybe just based on this cursory reading of the list. Exactly. Missionaries are like they're the worst kind of thing you can do. It's five sins.
Now,
And you're not even allowed to save his life or to reduce your hatred for him. He's doing the worst thing possible. He's drawing the Jewish people away from their God, from their worship.
Consider goyim, like goyim who are missionaries, to be mesites, or is this
No,
specifically
No. This only refers to Jews. It's only refers to Jews. There's other reasons, Yeah, that's right. Jews for Jesus type of thing. That's like, understand how historically.
Halakhically Jewish, believe it or not.
Could be, yeah, makes sense. But anyways, I'm not saying that this is not
We don't need to go too deep.
a practical guideline. Don't take this and say, oh, it says we're supposed to burn them, so let's go burn them. No, this is the list of the mitzvot listed in the Torah. Of course, there's oral Torah that explains, how we apply that, in which era we apply that. We don't have capital punishment nowadays. Chill, okay? Don't try this at home, folks. But we are learning Torah, so
Cannot burn the CDs?
not yet. Okay.
You need a Sanhedrin.
Right, we need a Sanhedrin. Well, there's a lot of things we're missing that don't allow us to do capital punishment. The truth is, even when there was a Sanhedrin, they didn't always practice capital punishments. It's not so simple. Yeah, but it does show you the direction. What's important and what's less important. What's serious. Yeah.
If religious Jew, it's a missionary in other country, like a missionary. Like he go there to teach Torah.
To Jews. He's not going to missionize other people from other religions. He's going to help them bring. If he goes to missionize other Jews, goyim to convince. That's not a Jewish tradition, but I don't think it's prohibited. I don't think there's any prohibition.
No, but he enters in the city.
No. This is only for foreign worship. To convince people to worship for idol worship, right? To convince people to worship other gods, to make people worship our God. There's tension there. We're trying to get our own people first to worship our God, and to fulfill the mitzvahs before we go out and missionizing the rest of the world. But before doesn't necessarily mean chronological. It means primary importance, but in terms of priorities. But that's not false gods here. Okay. Number 19. If you happen to be a prophet, or if you want to become a prophet, don't be a prophet. Don't prophesy in the name of false gods. So make sure it's the real thing. Go ahead, Moshe. 19. I did.
Not to prophesy in the name of false gods. Not to listen to anyone who prophesizes in the name of false gods. Not to give false prophecy even in the name of God. Not to fear executing a false prophet. Not to swear in the name of a false god. Not to perform the deeds associated with an
Ov.
What's an
Ov is a Hebrew word.
Is it Ayin and...
No, it's Aleph Vavet. Aleph Vavet. It's in the pasuk in the Torah. It speaks about people that call people up from the dead. Like
Ouija boards and stuff like that.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, prohibited by the Torah. People who conjure up dead people.
For what?
So is it like people who try to talk to the dead?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And same thing for the next one. What's a Yidoni?
Okay, so Yidoni is similar, but they use a bone.
A bone?
A bone. Like a bone of an animal or of a person. It's a technique that was apparently popular in the Torah. Wanted to uproot it, and there's explicit prohibition. Goes together with Ov and Yidoni. Do not do that stuff. Another popular form of worship, unfortunately, was called Molech. Anybody know what Molech is? Yeah.
It was like a bronze idol, I think an owl, and people offered children sacrifice.
Right, child sacrifice. Yeah, I didn't know about the bronze owl. I didn't know about the, but I did. I think it's clearly.
It's not to offer child sacrifice.
Child sacrifice is the major thing here. That's a bad
So just
Avodah Zarah.
Is Molech a person or like the practice?
It's an idol.
It's an idol.
It's a foreign god. It's like like we said before. What's the name of our god? Yud Ke Vav Ke. We don't even say his name. So there's names of other idols that
Yeah, he's mentioned in Torah.
Of course. Yeah, sure. The Nevi'im. Yeah. 27. Please go ahead.
26. Not to offer to Molech, not to erect a pillar for purposes of worship, not to prostrate oneself on hewn stones.
What's that?
So I'll tell you. Number 27, not to erect a pillar. Usually that's translated as it's a translation, I believe, for matzeva. Matzeva is a form of an altar, so you can't make an altar at all. It's sorry.
Totem.
Totem, maybe. That a totem is a form of an idol, or it's a form of maybe it's some kind of structure that for the purpose of worship. We won't get into the details right now. You're not allowed to prostrate oneself, to bow down on stone floors. That's why on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, if you see people bow, well, one time a year that we actually do bow down, we kneel in the synagogue. We always put something down in front of our faces. People think, all those towels is to keep our pants clean. No, that's not about that. It's actually to keep the mitzvah in the Torah, that we don't bow down if you have stone floors. We're careful about it, and now we have ceramic, we have all sorts of different kinds of floors. Ceramic and stone, but what if you have parquet or some kind of a wood floor? Still, we put down something before we bow down because there's a prohibition in the Torah not to. Apparently, this was an idol worship, a common form of idol worship. So the Torah says we want to stay away from that. Yes?
Not to be a smart ass, but does that count as asphalt and gravel and other forms?
What about for doing
No.
push-ups?
I think just stone.
What about for doing push-ups?
Okay.
Something like that. So you're obviously not worshiping, but you're still.
If you're not worshiping, you're safe.
Okay.
Okay.
And Asherah number 29, just to move ahead, is that it's a tree. There's a book published last year. People come up with all sorts of interesting ideas. That the Asherah is the name of a god. It's a foreign god, like Molech is the name of it's a specific god associated with a tree. They came up with this theory that
Fertility, right?
maybe it has something to do with fertility.
Asherah, it's a female.
Maybe,
So it's
yeah.
a type of tree.
A worshiping.
It's a worshipping tree. It's a foreign. Some people said that in the ancient world, at one time there was a couple. Asherah was the wife of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Of course, not in our religion. That the Torah says clearly you're not allowed to place an Asherah anywhere near the temple or. To this day, that's why in all the synagogues around the world, maybe except for some Reform ones who don't know this halacha, that we don't put vegetation inside the synagogue, even though we're not worshiping the tree. Even if we put flowers, we don't put vegetation. There's no trees and flowers inside the synagogue. There's one exception. Anybody know what time of year? Lulav is good, and one other. Shavuot. On Shavuot, there's a custom to decorate the synagogue with all sorts of branches and stuff, similar to Sinai. The mountain had all sorts of vegetation on it, and we're recreating that scene. But it's a question why that's allowed. Ultimately, that's the custom, so you know that was allowed. But the rest of the year, we don't have any any trees or anything like that. Based on number 29, it's an extension of number 29. Don't worship an Asherah tree. Yes.
Do we know what an Asherah looks like, or do we only know what it is?
I don't think there's only one form. I think there's many pictures and depictions, and even I don't think there's actual trees left over,
So it's
but
not
there are pictures of
For
it.
example, the Kosher class, there's some animals that we've kind of figured out what they were, but we haven't figured out what type of plant is.
It doesn't have to be one specific plant. There's any tree or any plant that you worship. I think in the Indians, I call them Indians because Native Americans. I mean Native Americans.
First,
Nowadays, I don't know what's the proper term nowadays. No,
changes every year.
no offense meant. You know what I mean.
They call themselves American Indians.
No. For me, there always be Redskins. Oh, I'm not supposed to say that.
No.
The Washington Redskins. Oh, you can't say that either. You can't. I don't know.
Washington football team.
I don't. Perfectly. Actually, my current team that I watch because of Tom Brady is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which were Pirates. I think Buccaneers, right? So is that a good thing to? I don't know why these teams better go with the Falcons and the Toronto Blue Jays. That's all these social, cultural groups. Maple Leafs. That's right.
Maple Leafs.
True. Maple Leafs. Right. Correct. In any case, how did we get onto that?
I don't know.
Oh, I was saying that the Native Americans, I think they have some kind of worship of trees. In their religion, in their traditions, they have elders. There's lots.
Yeah.
There's lots, but so until today, I don't think it's totally out of this world yet. Unfortunately, there's work to do, boys. Let's get to work. Roll up your sleeves. We got some burning to do. Right?
But it doesn't count, does not count only for Israel. For Eretz Israel.
Correct. Well, it's not clear. It's not clear. If not sure. We have to look inside the details. It's I think a specific law not to let Avodah Zarah remain in your land, but if you come across Avodah Zarah anywhere, I think that there's a mitzvah to destroy it. But I think we have to look into that detail. I'm not sure you're 100% correct. But anyways, as I said before, don't try this at home. We're not giving you practical guidance here about how to, search and destroy. Number 30, Moshe, you're doing such a great job.
To destroy false gods and all their objects of worship. 31, not to benefit from false gods and all their objects of worship. I have a question about this one.
Yeah.
So if one comes across a missionary, and the missionary is convincing Jews to worship false gods, is one allowed to take the book of Avodah Zarah from that missionary and beat them with that book? Would that be gaining benefit from an object of foreign worship?
That's a very interesting question. As I said before, we are not going to be deriving practical laws from this list. Okay? Don't try this at home. There's good questions. What to do when you encounter somebody, the classic question is for an Orthodox Jew, he goes to a motel in America or a hotel. You open up the drawer. What do you find?
Oh, I actually...
The Gideon Bible, right? It's everywhere.
I was in this one hotel.
Which is the New Testament, which is not...
There was the Gideon, obviously. There was also a Book of Mormon. And there was also a Quran.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Very multicultural place.
Very multicultural.
In any case, so the bottom line is definitely don't steal other people's things. In the countries we live in, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Okay, I don't know. We'll have to check. We're not going to get to practical questions based on reading a list. We didn't even read the laws. We're just trying to get through the list. And I want to show you the Rambam's introduction, really. So let's keep going. And there are of course practical questions which still apply today about this list. Yeah.
If someone allows, like he did you convert, and then he had in his home like some image of like religion that he was before, it's how we should do, like how it should be.
Wow! You could make a party and celebrate destroying the idol. Sure.
The Kochavim did that.
But there is
who?
Kochavim.
Oh, okay, cool.
We should burn, we should mash, we should...
Anyway, there's no specific way to destroy it.
No.
Could you have the barbecue? So could you use the burning of those books to like roast hot dogs or something?
No, you're not allowed to derive benefits of that. You're not allowed to derive benefits from that. So, but by all means, if that's a practical application. Okay, it was. Let's keep going, Moshe. Go ahead. 33.
And not to establish a covenant with nations who worship false gods.
32.
We did that. Go ahead. 34.
Not to show them favor. Not to allow them to settle in our land. Not to follow their customs or manner of dress. Not to act as a soothsayer. Not to practice black magic. Not to practice
soothsayer.
A fortune teller.
Not to practice divination. Not to cast spells. Not to seek information from the dead. Not to consult an oath. Not to consult a Yidoni.
Whoever remembers what those are.
You will talk to the dead.
Right, good.
And the people who use the bone to talk to the dead.
Right, so the first prohibition was on the actual person performing it, and this is a prohibition on the person going to them, consulting them. Right.
Not to practice sorcery. Not to shave the temples of our heads. Not to shave the corners of our beards. For a man not to wear a woman's apparel.
Here's a question.
One second. Could just finish the list.
Not to wear armament or a man's apparel. Not to tattoo one's body. Not to make cuts in one's flesh. Not to tear out hair in mourning for the dead.
So as you can see, this last list, the last part of the list includes practices which are very practical. This is not all just about, who worships idols anymore, and or just stay away from idols. There's lots of practices which the Torah throws in there, which the Rambam here is connecting them to idol worship, which to this day, how to not to shave our beards and the corners of our temples, of our heads, the side of our heads, and cross-dressing, tattoos. These are lots of practical questions. One day we'll get to them on a halacha class, and we'll talk about all those details. But just see, the Rambam puts it in together as part of a foreign worship practices. Yeah.
So I used to sell shoes, and I worked in the men's department almost exclusively.
Okay.
Shoes.
It's very from.
Every once in a while there would be a woman who'd come to the department. So if there's a woman who had, no, if a woman had unusually wide feet,
yes,
or she was just unusually large, she couldn't buy shoes from the women's department because there weren't any there that would fit. So she'd have to buy shoes from the men's department.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that problematic? Or let's say,
it's an interesting question.
If you're a man and you have very small feet,
right.
Are you allowed to, if there's a pair of shoes that's not like bright pink, just black sneakers, are you allowed to get those from the women's department?
It's a good question.
Socks
it's a good question.
Or things like that.
Very good question. So there's, as we said, each one of these is going to be lots of practical questions. We're not going to deal with them. I think just to give you a brief direction, if it's not noticeable, whether it comes from the men's department or the women's department, the halacha is not defined by which department they sell it in, right? If it looks like a woman's apparel and a man's wearing it, that's going to be, you're in the wrong direction. But if it's not noticeable, there's no problem. I think. What defines it as men's versus women's, Okay. Anyways, that's the list. Just wanted to, Renan, you also wanted to ask a question.
Why, this, to shave the beard, the corners of the head, and all this entering Avodat?
Good question. Apparently, this was part of, till today, I think it's part of certain cults. They get a specific style of haircut, and there's priests that do a bowl cut,
yes,
shave out. So that was way back then as well.
Tibetan
monks, that's right.
Krishnas, I think.
Krishnas, Egyptians, we see. This was part of the cult. It was part of the service, the haircuts. Yeah.
Question,
Yeah.
First, 32 ornaments.
Right.
There's many kinds of ornaments now,
Right.
that it's have a symbology.
Yes.
And many people don't know.
Right. It's a good question.
Well, what we should do, if we see it.
It's a good question. As I said, it's one of the many practical questions coming out of this list, which we're not going to deal with in this class. But the brief answer is that if nobody worships it, it was not made for the sake of worship. And it's just like, what was the question about? There's a certain trademark of a company that sells, I think, some kind of knapsacks or something. And it had some kind of a symbol of some ancient god, Aztec or something like that, right?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, some Aztec coats. They have the symbol. And it used to be okay, but that society's gone, long gone. Nobody worships it anymore. Now it's just a commercial trademark. Many poskim say that that's allowed. It's not. It doesn't have the same meaning it used to have. But and the main thing is it's all mass produced in China by people who don't believe in anything. So nobody's really invested it with any belief. Okay, this poor kid, was slave labor.
They believe in the renminbi.
Who?
Renminbi is the name of the Chinese currency.
Okay. That is the wen.
I do have one. The yuan is it's the same meaning, just different context.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one more question. So I every once in a while enjoy drinking beer. I like European beer, like German beer, but a lot of German beer, even stuff that you can find here, it has depictions of friars and monks on it, and sometimes there's they'll have a cross on them, or let's say the logo of the beer will have a coat of arms, and the coat of arms will obviously have a lot of Christian imagery on it. Is that problematic? Like what I've been doing, especially if I'm bringing it downstairs for Shabbos, I use a Sharpie and I color that stuff out. But is that problematic?
So that's another good question, practical question coming out of just reading a list in the Rambam, and we're not going to make a halachic decision based on reading a list again. But to just give you a little more so that you can sleep at night, is that again, in most cases these are commercial trademarks. They were not printed with any intention to be a part of the worship and so forth. Although sensitivity to these things is a good thing. I like drinking beer, but I also like drinking whiskey. And there was a whiskey that I was buying for a while, which was pretty cheap and good enough for me. And after a while, my son noticed that on the bottle, like actually the shape of the bottle, they had their trademark sign, and he was convinced that it was a pig. I thought it was more some kind of a boar, some kind of a wild. Anyways, he didn't like it because it looked like a pig. So I stopped buying the whiskey. It's important to be sensitive to these things, even though I'm not going to say it's forbidden to drink that whiskey just because there's a picture of a pig on it. That doesn't make it non-kosher. But so about these Christian symbols, unfortunately, we live in a very, very Christianized Western civilization. The symbols come up everywhere. We're right after Christmas. Luckily in Israel you rarely see anything, but in America you can't walk a block without seeing symbols of crosses and Santa Claus and all sorts of. So it's a big question. There's a lot of practical questions about dealing with, foreign worship.
It's in the old city.
So I don't think so. I don't think nobody worships it. Nobody. Even did they used to? I don't even know. I don't.
City a couple weeks ago.
I don't know about that. Yeah.
I just kind of, as I was walking, I just looked down the street in the Christian quarter, and I saw all these decorations. And after it kind of caught me off guard, and then I realized, hang on, those are the only Christmas decorations I've seen.
That's right. You notice it because there aren't many. Baruch Hashem. Although there are more and more. Unfortunately, we have to. Yeah, here in Israel, if you go see the lights, what I grew up with calling them Christmas lights, the Israelis have no concept. They put them in their sukkah, right? Those flashing little strings of lights. They're decorations for the sukkah. They don't know of any association with any Christmas trees or those kind of things. But so there's a lot of questions, a lot of practical questions coming out of these laws. This is not the halacha class, and we're not dealing with all those ramifications now. But I do not make light of the question. We could do sometimes, sure. We'll get to one thing at a time. But let's begin. This is the list of 51 mitzvot associated with idol worship. And the explanation is found in these following chapters. Chapter 1, Halacha 1.
Mary?
Please.
Okay. Halacha 1. During the times of Enosh, mankind made a great mistake.
Who was Enosh, David?
He was the grandson of Adam.
Grandson of Adam.
Son of Shet.
That's right. Adam Shet Enosh. Right, we spoke about this yesterday.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Enosh was the guy that goes to heaven.
No, it was Enoch, right?
No, that's Chanoch. We also talked about that yesterday. The difference between the two, because of the Aleph and the Het, and the people confuse them. They're similar in English, but in Hebrew they're two different people. And the Shin at the end instead of the Chaf at the end of the word. So it seems to be totally different. But I understand where you're coming from and people confusing the two. In any case, Enosh, when we go back to Bereshit, Enosh is one of another name for primordial man, really, right? Adam and Enosh, we say Ish and Isha. The word Enosh comes from the same word as Anashim, people. So, one of the early history of man's of civilization, pretty much, is what it means to us. There's a tradition that it happened specifically to this person called Enosh, but the Rambam here is channeling, of course, the words of Chazal, and he presents it so beautifully. So, without further ado, I'll let you read. Go ahead, David, from the beginning.
I start over.
Yeah.
During the times of Enosh, mankind made a great mistake, and the wise men of that generation gave thoughtless counsel. Enosh himself was one of those who erred. The mistake was as follows. They said God created stars and spheres with which to control the world. He placed them on high and treated them with honor, making them servants who minister before him. Accordingly, it is fitting to praise and glorify them and to treat them with honor. They perceive this to be the will of God, blessed be He, that they magnify and honor those whom He magnified and honored, just as a king desires that the servants who stand before him be honored. Indeed, doing so is an expression of honor to the king.
First stage the Rambam describes is actually makes a lot of sense. He says, okay, we really want to worship God. But God created the stars, and the stars are running the world. The astrology, right? Everything gets all the instructions of God get transmitted to the lower world through this intermediary stage of these stars. So we have to show honor to the stars as a form of showing honor to God. But it could then the history of religion continues. The Rambam's brief history of religion. Go ahead.
After conceiving of this notion, they began to construct temples to the stars and offer sacrifices to them. They would praise and glorify them with words and prostrate themselves before them, because by doing so they would, according to their false conception, be fulfilling the will of God. This was the essence of the worship of false gods, and this was the rationale of those who worshipped them. They would not say that there is no other God except for this star. This message was conveyed by Yirmiyahu, who declared, "Who will not fear you, King of the nations? For to you it is fitting. Among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. They have one foolish and senseless notion they conceive of their empty teaching as wood. All know that you alone are God. Their foolish error consists of conceiving of this emptiness as your will."
Okay, so it sounds like they're on the wrong. They have the wrong mode or method, but they're still worshiping God. Okay, that's the first stage. Go ahead. Maybe someone else wants to read. Ravid, is it? No. Okay. Thomas, will you read for us number 2?
Yeah, 2.
Halacha 2 in the Rambam.
After many years passed, there arose people without prophets who told their nations that God had commanded them to say, "Serve the stars, for all the stars. Sacrifice to it, offer libation to it, build a temple for it, and make an image of it, so that all people, including the woman, the children, and the common people, would bow to it." He will inform them of a form that he had conceived, and tell them that this is the image of a particular star, claiming that this was revealed to him in a prophetic vision. In this manner, the people began to make images in temple and their priests, and on the top of mountains and hills.
Okay, so did you know that the cross? Sometimes in movies you see it that it looks like a star. The star twinkles in the distance. Many times they depict it in the form of a cross. This is some kind of a representation of the stars. It's all coming from, the stars were part of nature, so then you idolize that part of nature. It turns into an idol. And then, go ahead, Jacob. Will you read for us the top of page 2?
People would gather together and bow down to them, and the false prophets would say the image is the source of benefit or harm. It is appropriate to serve it and fear it. Their priests would tell them, "This service would enable you to multiply and be successful. Do this and this, or do not do this or this." Subsequently, other deceivers arose and declared that a specific star, sphere, or angel had spoken to them and commanded them, "Serve me in this manner." He would then relate a mode of service, telling them, "Do this, do not do this." Thus, the practice is spread throughout the world. People would serve images with strange practices, one more distorted than the other, offer sacrifice to them, and bow down to them. As the years passed, God's glorious and awesome name was forgotten by the entire population. It was no longer part of it, their speech or thought, and they would no longer knew him. Thus, all the common people, the women and the children, would know only the image of the wood or the stone, and the temples of stone to which they were trained from their childhood to bow down and serve, and in whose name they swore. The wise men among them would think that there is no God other than the stars and the spheres, for whose sake and in resemblance of which they had made these images. The eternal rock was not recognized or known by anyone in the world, with the exception of a few individuals, for example, Hanoch, Metulecha,
To Shelach.
Meshelach, sorry, Noach, Shem, and Aver. The world continued in this fashion until the pillar of the world, the patriarch Abraham, was born.
Okay, stop here. So the Rabbi makes a description, and he says, so let's say it all starts. I think part of human nature. He says maybe everybody at the beginning of civilization. They recognized and they knew about God, but then they started to worship the stars, and then as an agent of God, and maybe the common folk would worship the stars. The really wise people realized that the stars are just the agents or the instruments of God. But then from the stars, the next stage is they started to make representations. We'll call them idols, which were meant to represent the stars. And they said people really only think one stage back. And so here, the common folk, they believed in the idols, but the people that were really a little bit wiser, they realized, oh, the idols are just representation of the stars. But then they didn't get 2 stages back, and so essentially they're leaving this concept of the rock. What does he say? What does he call it at the end? The eternal rock was not recognized or known by anyone in the world, because the highest, the people, the common folk would believe in the idol itself, and the really wise people would think, oh, the idols are just representative of the stars. But nobody went back all the way back to recognize that really who we're worshiping is the origin of everything, the eternal rock, except for a few individuals. Now, here he mentions Chanoch, right? Chanoch. He was famously singled out by our sages. It says that he died early, or he doesn't even say he died. He was no longer because he was with God. So it sounds like he was on a very special spiritual level. Metushelach is famous for?
He lived for 916 years.
Exactly, the longest living human. Noach, we all know. Shem and Aver. Shem was one of the sons of Noach, and Aver was his son. So there's a chain being started, and then Abraham was alive at the time. He probably even met Noach. For sure, he met Aver, according to the chronology in the Breshit. And so this mix-up and this slowly but surely getting removed from the concept of God himself was what was going on in the world until the patriarch Abraham was born. Yeah, Renan had a question, and then Jacob will take a question. Yeah.
Like in this process, like they see that some stars, it's moving, like they go itineraries.
Yeah.
So then they start to worship, it's the planets actually.
Correct.
So
correct.
It's
Yeah.
like Mars, Jupiter.
True. That's right. They're names of gods. Absolutely. Correct. That's what the Rambam was describing. Yeah, Jacob.
Just wanted to clarify. It says the eternal rock. That's like the foundation stone.
That's God. It's a euphemism for God himself. It's like it's a moniker.
What is it in Hebrew?
It's just a name. It's a name we call him. We call him Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Adonai. We call him all sorts of names. Another name for him is Tzur. Tzur, it means a rock. Tzur Yisrael. We say it in our prayers, right? Tzur Olamim, right? The eternal rock.
So,
Tzur means rock.
Just to be like 100% sure, it's like I think it's like after we're finished the Amida, or just at the end of it. It says like Tzur.
It's right before the Amida.
Right before the Amida. Sorry.
Tzur Yisrael. It
That is
refers
not,
to
that is
God.
Not the foundation stone.
No.
Oh.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's another one of those many names of God. Yeah. Don't say I never taught you anything. Okay, so far, but we're ready. We're ready to see the light, to restore the proper faith to humanity. 3, Hanan, will you read for us Halacha 3?
Yeah. After this mighty man was weaned.
Who? Which mighty man are we talking about? Avraham. That's right.
He began to explore and think. Though he was a child, he began to think incessantly throughout the day and night, wondering, how is it possible for the sphere to continue to revolve without having anyone controlling it? Who is causing it to revolve? Surely it does not cause itself to revolve. He had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him. Rather, he was mired in Ur-Kasdim among the foolish idolaters. His father, mother, and all the people around him were idol worshippers, and he would worship with them. However, his heart was exploring and gaining understanding. Ultimately, he appreciated the way of truth and understood the path of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. He realized that there's one God who controlled the sphere, that he created everything, and that there's no other God among all the other entities. He knew that the entire world was making a mistake. What caused them to err was their service of the stars and the images which made them lose awareness of the truth. Abraham was 40 years old when he became aware of his creator. When he recognized and knew him, he began to formulate replies to the inhabitants of Ur Kasdim and debate with them, telling them that they were not following the proper path. He broke their idols and began to teach the people that it is fitting to serve only the God of the world. To him alone it is fitting to bow down, sacrifice, and offer libations, so that the people of future generations would recognize him. Conversely, it is fitting to destroy and break all the images, lest all the people err concerning them, like these people who thought that there are no other gods besides these images. When he overcame them through the strength of his arguments, the king desired to kill him.
Just stop here for a second. You know this story? That Avram's father, his name was Terach, the Torah tells us, and the Midrash tells us that Terach was a producer of idols. He had a factory to produce idols, and he had to go off on business one day and left Avram, his son, in charge. So Avram was in charge of the store, and he did the following. He had come to his new realization that these idols are all false, and there's only one God. And so what he did is he smashed all the idols except for one. The biggest one, and he put a big stick in the hand of the biggest idol. And when his father came back and he said, "What happened to my store, to all my supply?" He says, "Well, you can see it looks like the biggest idol smashed all the smaller idols." And the father was very upset, very angry. He says, "What are you? Come on, that's impossible. It's ridiculous. You. What did you do?" And he said, "So." Listen to yourself. If you don't think that he can smash the other idols, obviously this idol is not worth much. What are you doing? And word got out that Abraham was going on a new path, and the king didn't like that. This was bucking the system. This is what's called
Nimrod, right?
Nimrod, right? According to tradition, Nimrod was the foreign god who wanted everybody to bow down to the idols. This is the word iconoclast. Abraham was the first iconoclast. Icon. The idol, breaking down this is the first Jew breaking down the idols. Okay, so what did Avraham have to do? He had to run away. Go ahead, Hanan, you're doing such a good job.
Sorry, quick question. Where is this written in the Tanakh about Abraham's father?
It's his name is written in the Tanakh. The story is in the Midrash.
But where is his name in the Tanakh?
Oh, in Bereshit, where we just read it, in Parshat, the end of Parshat Noach. It talks about Terach took his son Abraham with him from Ur Kasdim. By all means, yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Hanan.
When he overcame them through the strength of his arguments, the king desired to kill him. He was saved through a miracle and left for Haran.
What was the miracle? Do you know what happened to him? How did he try to kill Avraham? Threw him in a furnace. That's right. You might have heard of this. The furnace. Now somehow God saved Abraham from the furnace. It was a miracle. And he left for Haran. But go ahead. There he began to call.
He began to call in a loud voice for all people to inform them that there is one God in the entire world and it is proper to serve him.
So he would
go out and gather people, gathering them in city after city and country after country, till he came to the land of Canaan, proclaiming God's existence the entire time. As Genesis states, he called there in the name of the Lord, the eternal God.
This is what Avram does. He calls in the name of the Lord. What does that mean? He taught about the true belief. And this is a beautiful description how Avraham was the first. Some people, I asked them, who's the first Jew? Some people say Moses. According to this, Avram was the founder of the Jewish belief. Russell, will you continue for us, finish it off for us with the last few minutes? Sorry? Your question?
His name? Well, now I forget.
Avraham?
No.
Terach?
The guy that come to Abraham to bless him.
Melchizedek. Melchizedek, yeah.
He was a priest for El Elyon,
Right,
right?
right, right,
And he bring wine and bread.
right.
He bring kiddush.
It
He comes to do kiddush.
was a form of worship, for sure, yeah.
But he was worshiping God.
El Elyon, that's the name of
His own understanding of it, yeah, his own understanding. There's a tradition that he was on the right track, but he showed a lot of respect to Avraham because he was on the same wavelength with him. But that's a sidetrack right now. I want to finish the piece. We have 4 minutes left. Yeah.
He was worshiping God or another God.
We're not sure. Sounds like he worshipped some form of God, which is close enough for Avraham to be able to accept his gift. And he seems to be a positive character, although it's more complicated. So let's leave that discussion of Melchizedek for another time, and let's finish chapter 1 in the laws of Avodah Zarah of the Rambam. Russell, will you continue for us? When the people
would gather around him and ask him about his statements, he would explain them to each one of them according to their understanding until they turned to the path of truth. Ultimately, thousands and myriads gathered around him. These are the men of the house of Abraham. He planted in their hearts this great fundamental principle, composed texts about it, and taught it to Yitzhak his son. Yitzhak also taught others and turned their hearts to God. He also taught Yaakov and appointed him as a teacher. Yaakov taught others and turned the hearts of all those who gathered around him to God. He also taught all of his children. He selected Levi and appointed him as the leader. He established him as the head of the academy to teach them the way of God and observe the mitzvot of Abraham. Yaakov commanded his sons that the leadership should not depart from the descendants of Levi, so that the teachings would not be forgotten. This concept proceeded and gathered strength among the descendants of Yaakov and those who collected around them until they became a nation within the world which knew God. When the Jews extended their stay in Egypt, however, they learned from the Egyptians' deeds and began worshipping the stars as they did, with the exception of the tribe of Levi, who clung to the mitzvot of the patriarchs. The tribe of Levi never served false gods. Within a short time, the fundamental principle that Abraham had planted would have been uprooted, and the descendants of Yaakov would have returned to the errors of the world and their crookedness. Because of God's love for us, and to uphold the oath he made to Abraham, our patriarch, he brought forth Moshe, our teacher, the master of all prophets, and sent him to redeem the Jews. After Moshe, our teacher, prophesied, and God chose Israel as his inheritance, he crowned them with mitzvot and informed them of the path to serve him, teaching them the judgment prescribed for idol worshippers and all those who stray after it.
Yeah, so that brings us straight to our parsha. God chose the Jewish people and chose to take them out of Egypt and save them from the idol worship, not falling back to sort of preserving this tradition that they had through Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and it was getting a little bit shaky with the subjugation in Egypt. But the tribe of Levi stood fast, and Moshe, a descendant of the tribe of Levi, was chosen to lead the Jewish people out and give us the Torah and the mitzvot, and that's where we get all these 51 mitzvot, which we listed above. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful chapter in the Rambam. Then he goes into all the nitty-gritty of the details of all the prohibitions of idol worship in this form or that form, and we'll leave that for another time. Thank you for your participation. This was a pleasure to learn Torah with you. And we'll continue with Zed Hashem tomorrow. B'kasha.